Sarah was a young woman with big dreams. She lived in a small, peaceful town where everyone knew each other, and life moved at a slow, steady pace. Sarah loved her town, but she always dreamed of exploring the world. Her room was filled with travel books and maps, and she would spend hours imagining herself in faraway places. One country that always fascinated her was Canada. She had seen pictures of its breathtaking landscapes, vast forests, towering mountains, and beautiful lakes. The idea of visiting such a place filled her with excitement. So, she set a goal for herself. One day, she would visit Canada. For 2 years, Sarah worked hard to save money for her trip. She worked extra shifts at the local bookstore, did babysitting jobs, and even sold some of her handmade crafts online. Every dollar she saved brought her closer to her dream. She also started learning English, knowing that it would be important to communicate with people during her trip. Finally, the day came when Sarah had enough money to buy her plane ticket. She could hardly believe it. She was going to Canada. Her parents were very supportive and helped her plan the trip. They were proud of her determination and courage. On the morning of her departure, Sarah woke up early. She was filled with a mix of excitement and nervousness. She packed her suitcase with great care, making sure she had everything she needed. She brought warm clothes, as she had heard that Canada could be quite cold, even in the summer. She also packed her camera, a travel guide about Canada, her favorite book, and a notebook to record her thoughts and experiences. At the airport, everything was new and exciting to Sarah. She checked in her luggage, went through security, and found her way to the gate. The airport was bustling with people from all over the world. Sarah loved hearing the different languages spoken around her, and it made her even more excited about the adventure ahead. She found a seat near the window and waited for her flight. When it was time to board the plane, Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. This was her first time flying, and the idea of being so high up in the sky made her a little uneasy, but she reminded herself that this was all part of the adventure. She found her seat by the window, and as the plane took off, she watched the ground disappear beneath the clouds. It was a beautiful sight, and her nervousness soon turned into excitement. The flight was long, but Sarah didn't mind. She spent the time reading her book, watching movies, and practicing her English by listening to conversations around her. She also struck up a conversation with the passenger sitting next to her, a friendly woman named Linda who was returning home to Canada after visiting family in another country. Linda was impressed with Sarah's English and gave her some tips on places to visit in Canada. When the plane finally landed in Toronto, Sarah could hardly contain her excitement. She had made it to Canada. She retrieved her suitcase from the baggage claim and followed the signs to the exit. As she stepped outside the airport, she took a deep breath. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was a clear, bright blue. It felt wonderful to be in a new place. Sarah had booked a room in a small hotel near the city center. She took a taxi from the airport, and as they drove through the streets of Toronto, she was amazed by everything she saw. The city was so different from her small town. There were tall buildings, busy streets, and people everywhere. The taxi driver was very friendly and gave her some advice on where to go and what to see. He recommended a visit to the CN Tower, the Royal Ontario Museum, and the Art Gallery of Ontario. When Sarah arrived at the hotel, she checked in and went up to her room. It was small but cozy, with a comfortable bed, a desk, and a window that looked out onto the street below. She unpacked her suitcase, took a quick shower, and decided to explore the city right away. She didn't want to waste any time. Her first stop was the CN Tower, one of the tallest buildings in the world. Sarah had seen pictures of it before, but seeing it in person was incredible. She took the elevator to the top, and when she stepped out onto the observation deck, she was amazed by the view. She could see the entire city spread out below her, with its streets, parks, and buildings stretching out in all directions. The sun was setting, casting a golden light over everything. Sarah took out her camera and started taking pictures. She wanted to capture every moment of this incredible experience. After spending some time at the CN Tower, Sarah walked around the city, exploring different neighborhoods. She visited the Distillery District, with its cobblestone streets and old brick buildings, and then made her way to Kensington Market, a lively area full of colorful shops, cafes, and street art. Everywhere she went, she saw something new and interesting. As she walked, Sarah practiced her English by talking to people she met along the way. She asked for directions, ordered food at cafes, and chatted with shopkeepers. Everyone was friendly and patient with her, and they seemed happy to help her practice. Sarah felt more confident with each conversation, and she was proud of herself for trying. One evening, while exploring a park near her hotel, Sarah met a woman named Emily. Emily was sitting on a bench reading a book, and Sarah noticed that the book was in English. This gave her the courage to start a conversation. "Hello," Sarah said with a smile. "Is that a good book?" Emily looked up and smiled back. "Yes, it's very good. I'm enjoying it. Are you from around here?" "No, I'm visiting from another country," Sarah replied. "I'm trying to improve my English." "Well, you're doing a great job," Emily said warmly. "Where are you from?" "I'm from a small town far away," Sarah explained. "This is my first time traveling alone, and I'm so excited to be in Canada." "That's wonderful. Canada is a beautiful country, and Toronto is a great city to explore," Emily said. "If you want, I can show you around a bit. I know some interesting places that you might like." Sarah was thrilled by the offer. "That would be amazing. Thank you so much." Over the next few days, Emily became Sarah's guide and friend. They visited many places together, including the Royal Ontario Museum, where Sarah learned about Canadian history and saw exhibits about dinosaurs, ancient cultures, and art. They also went to the Art Gallery of Ontario, where Sarah admired paintings and sculptures from both Canadian and international artists. One of the most memorable experiences for Sarah was visiting the Toronto Islands. Emily suggested they take a ferry ride to the islands, which were just a short distance from the city. The ferry ride was a lot of fun, with a cool breeze blowing through their hair and the city skyline disappearing behind them. When they arrived on the islands, Sarah was amazed by how peaceful and beautiful it was. The islands were full of green spaces, beaches, and walking trails. They spent the day exploring, having a picnic by the water, and renting bikes to ride around the island. Sarah felt so happy and free, surrounded by nature and the sound of the waves gently crashing against the shore. As they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Emily and said, "This is the most beautiful place I've ever been. I never imagined Canada would be like this." "I'm glad you like it," Emily replied with a smile. "There's so much more to see in Canada, too. You've only just begun your adventure." That evening, they returned to the city, and Sarah couldn't stop talking about how much she loved the islands. She wrote all about it in her notebook, describing the sights, sounds, and feelings she experienced. She also made a promise to herself to come back to Canada one day and explore even more. Another highlight of Sarah's trip was a visit to Niagara Falls. Emily had suggested they take a day trip to see the famous waterfalls, and Sarah eagerly agreed. They took a bus from Toronto to Niagara Falls, and when they arrived, Sarah was stunned by the sight. The waterfalls were enormous, with water rushing over the edge and crashing down into the river below. The mist from the falls filled the air, and there was a constant roar of water. It was one of the most powerful and beautiful things Sarah had ever seen. They took a boat ride that brought them close to the falls. Sarah felt the cool spray of water on her face and couldn't stop smiling. She took many pictures to remember the experience. Afterward, they walked along the paths that followed the river, enjoying the views from different angles. As they walked, Emily told Sarah about the history of Niagara Falls and how it has been a popular tourist destination for many years. Sarah was fascinated by the stories and asked many questions. She was grateful for Emily's knowledge and for the chance to practice her English in such a beautiful place. Throughout her trip, Sarah continued to improve her English. She watched English TV shows in her hotel room, listened to English songs on her phone, and read English newspapers and magazines. She also kept a journal in English, writing about her daily experiences and the new words and phrases she learned. She was amazed at how much her English had improved in just a few weeks. One day, Emily invited Sarah to her home for dinner. Emily lived in a cozy apartment in a lively neighborhood. She had decorated her apartment with plants, colorful artwork, and bookshelves full of books. Sarah was impressed by how warm and welcoming the place felt. The aroma of food wafted through the air, making Sarah's stomach growl. "Come in. I'm making pasta," Emily said as she ushered Sarah into the kitchen. "I hope you like Italian food." "I love pasta," Sarah replied enthusiastically. "I'm so excited to try your cooking." As Emily prepared the meal, they chatted about their lives. Sarah shared stories about her small town, her family, and her dreams. Emily talked about her upbringing in Toronto, her love for art, and her job as a graphic designer. Sarah admired Emily's passion and creativity, feeling inspired by her friend's life. After dinner, they sat at the table, enjoying dessert, a delicious chocolate cake that Emily had baked. "This is amazing," Sarah exclaimed, savoring every bite. "You're a great cook." "Thank you. I enjoy cooking," Emily replied with a smile. "I think it's a great way to share culture and connect with others." As the evening went on, they laughed and exchanged stories. Emily asked Sarah about her English learning journey, and Sarah explained how challenging yet rewarding it had been. Emily encouraged her to keep practicing and assured her that she was doing great. "You know, learning a language is like traveling," Emily said thoughtfully. "It takes time and patience, but every step you take opens up new worlds." The next day, Sarah felt energized by her time with Emily. She wanted to explore more of Toronto and practice her English even more. They decided to visit St. Lawrence Market, a famous food market filled with vendors selling fresh produce, meats, cheeses, and baked goods. As they walked through the market, Sarah was amazed by the vibrant colors and delicious smells. "This place is incredible," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's one of my favorite spots in the city," Emily replied. "You can find almost anything here." They sampled various foods, from fresh fruit to artisan cheeses. Sarah was eager to practice her English, so she approached a vendor selling pastries. "Hello, what is this pastry called?" she asked, pointing to a sweet treat. "That's a butter tart. It's a Canadian specialty," the vendor replied. "Would you like to try one?" "Yes, please," Sarah said, smiling. She took a bite and felt a burst of sweetness in her mouth. "Wow, this is delicious." After their food adventure, they continued their exploration. They visited the Toronto Eaton Centre, a large shopping mall with many stores. Sarah practiced asking questions and navigating the shops, feeling more confident with her English. As they wandered through the mall, Emily noticed a bookstore. "Let's check it out. I love reading," she suggested. Inside the bookstore, Sarah was in heaven. She browsed the shelves, picking up books with interesting covers. "Look at this one," she said, holding up a novel. "It's about a girl who travels around the world." "Sounds perfect for you," Emily laughed. "You should definitely read it." Sarah decided to buy the book and added it to her collection of souvenirs. She loved collecting books from places she visited, and this one would remind her of her amazing trip to Canada. As the days passed, Sarah and Emily became closer friends. They explored more attractions like the Royal Ontario Museum and the Toronto Zoo. Every day was a new adventure, and Sarah was grateful for Emily's companionship. One day, as they walked through a beautiful park, Sarah turned to Emily and said, "Thank you for showing me around. I'm having the best time, and I wouldn't have done so much without you." "I'm really glad you're enjoying it," Emily replied. "You're a wonderful friend. It's been great sharing this experience with you." As their friendship grew, Sarah also met other people in Toronto. She attended a local art show where she met artists and learned about their work. She practiced her English by asking questions and engaging in conversations. Each interaction boosted her confidence and helped her feel more at home in this new city. In addition to exploring the city, Sarah joined a language exchange group. Every week, she met with other English learners and native speakers at a local cafe. They practiced speaking English over coffee and shared stories about their lives. Sarah loved the supportive environment, and she appreciated the chance to connect with others who were also learning a new language. One day at the language exchange, Sarah met a group of students from different countries. They were all in Toronto to improve their English and experience Canadian culture. They shared tips on language learning and even practiced together. Sarah felt excited to be part of this diverse group, where everyone encouraged one another. As Sarah's trip continued, she found herself falling in love with Canada. The people were friendly, the culture was rich, and the landscapes were breathtaking. One weekend, she and Emily decided to take a trip to Banff National Park in Alberta. Sarah had heard so much about the stunning mountains and lakes, and she couldn't wait to see them in person. They took a flight from Toronto to Calgary and then rented a car to drive to Banff. As they approached the park, Sarah was in awe of the towering mountains that surrounded them. The air was fresh, and the scenery was more beautiful than she had imagined. "Look at that view," Sarah exclaimed, pointing to the majestic peaks covered in snow. "I know, it's incredible," Emily replied, grinning from ear to ear. "Let's take some pictures." They stopped at various lookout points to capture the breathtaking views. Sarah felt grateful for the opportunity to experience such natural beauty. They hiked along scenic trails, exploring the park and taking in the sights of glacial lakes and wildflowers. One highlight of their trip was visiting Lake Louise, a stunning turquoise lake surrounded by mountains. The color of the water was mesmerizing, and Sarah couldn't believe her eyes. They rented a canoe and paddled across the lake, feeling the warm sun on their faces. "This is like a dream," Sarah said, smiling as she dipped her hand in the cool water. "I never want to leave," Emily laughed. "Me too. This is one of my favorite places in the world." As they enjoyed their adventure in Banff, Sarah reflected on how much she had grown since arriving in Canada. She had become more confident in her English, made new friends, and experienced incredible places. She felt a sense of accomplishment for pursuing her dream and stepping out of her comfort zone. On their last evening in Banff, they set up a small campfire to roast marshmallows and share stories. As they sat by the fire, the stars began to twinkle above them. Sarah gazed up at the night sky, feeling grateful for the journey she had taken. "Thank you for being such a wonderful friend, Emily," Sarah said, her voice sincere. "This trip has changed my life." "I'm so happy to hear that," Emily replied, her eyes shining. "You've worked hard." and you deserve every moment of this adventure. The next day, they returned to Toronto, and Sarah began to prepare for her departure. She felt a mix of emotions, excitement to return home, and sadness to leave behind her new friends and the beautiful country she had grown to love. On her last night in Toronto, Emily hosted a farewell dinner for Sarah. They cooked together, laughing and reminiscing about their favorite moments from the trip. After dinner, they sat on Emily's balcony, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. "I will miss you so much," Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. "You made this trip unforgettable. I'll miss you too, but we'll stay in touch, right?" Emily replied, giving Sarah a warm hug. "Of course! I want to hear all about your adventures," Sarah promised, "and I'll share my stories from home." The next day, Sarah packed her suitcase, filled with souvenirs, new clothes, and a heart full of memories. As she boarded the plane, she took one last look at the city she had fallen in love with. She knew this was not goodbye forever, but rather the beginning of many more adventures to come. As the plane took off, Sarah reflected on her journey. She had not only improved her English, but also learned about herself and the world around her. Traveling to Canada had been a dream come true, and she couldn't wait to share her experiences with her family and friends back home. In the months that followed, Sarah kept her promise to Emily. They exchanged messages and video calls, sharing their lives and supporting each other. Sarah continued to practice her English, using the skills she had gained during her trip. She often thought about her time in Canada and how it had changed her perspective on life. Inspired by her experiences, she decided to pursue a degree in international relations, hoping to work in a field that would allow her to travel and connect with people from different cultures. Sarah's trip to Canada had opened her eyes to new possibilities. She began volunteering in her community, helping newcomers learn English and settle into their new lives. She wanted to give back and support others, just as Emily had supported her. As she settled back into her routine, Sarah kept dreaming of her next adventure. She made a list of countries she wanted to visit, including Canada again. She hoped to explore the Canadian Rockies, visit the coastal cities of Vancouver and Victoria, and experience the culture of Quebec. Whenever she felt uncertain about her path, she would look at her travel photos and remember the joy of her trip. The lessons she learned in Canada became a source of inspiration, pushing her to chase her dreams and embrace new opportunities. Sarah knew that her journey was far from over. With every step she took, she was one step closer to discovering the world and herself. And as she planned her next adventure, she carried the spirit of Canada in her heart, knowing that the world was full of possibilities waiting to be explored.